Last week, international policing body Interpol issued an international arrest warrant for Samantha Luthwaite, one of the alleged masterminds of the attack on Nairobi, Kenya. However, many questions still linger. How did intelligence agencies here and abroad fail to detect the looming attack? How can we stop such attacks from happening again? My guests to discuss this are ENCA Group News Editor Ben Said and BBC Africa correspondent Andrew Harding. Both these senior journalists have just returned to Joburg after reporting on this story. Welcome back. It's good to see you nice, back, safe. And let me start with you. You wrote a moving piece today about all this on the BBC website, and you say compassionate, chaotic, occasionally violent, exceptionally tolerant nation, and you're talking about Kenya here. But what are the roots of this attack in this nation that you describe?
Well, you remember, of course, that Kenya is Somalia's neighbour and vice versa. There's been a huge influx over the past 2 decades of Somali refugees coming in and also Somali citizens, and there's a big Somali community. The Kenyans have absorbed that, and generally they've tried to stay out of any direct intervention inside Somalia. 2 years ago, their patience, one way or another, snapped. They decided to get involved in trying to build a buffer state along the border inside Somalia. They essentially backed local warlords. There's friction with Ethiopia. There's now huge friction with the new Somali government. And basically, they became a huge target for Al-Shabaab, which previously we know had operated inside Kenya. It had seen it as something as a sort of back area that they could do its funding, its fundraising and organization, but they hadn't really done any big bomb attacks there. And everyone assumed it was because they didn't want to mess things up. But once Kenya had gone in, the gloves were off. And that's why you see, I think, this last week's huge bomb.
Can we see it as just Al-Shabaab saying Kenya is the enemy now and we're going to hit back at you, as they have said? Or there has been lots of talk of links to Al-Qaeda and other international terrorist groups. Does it extend there, or does it just add to that
It's
web?
messy. It's complicated, and I don't think anyone has a proper pin on it. But remember the attack before the World Cup in Uganda? That wasn't just Somalis. That was a jihadist sort of international attack. The same with this one, of course, as far as we know. In the last 6 months or so, we've seen big frictions within Al-Shabaab. We've seen a more jihadist group take over, this man called Godani, who now seems to be in charge. He's been kicking out more moderate, more nationalist, more internally focused, Somali-focused Islamists. And this looks like something of a signature calling card for him, saying, you know, we've arrived. Some people see it as a sign of weakness. Shabaab is on the back foot in some ways inside Somalia. This federal government, backed massively by the West, investing so much money in this latest attempt to create a stable government there, has done something on the military front. But you know, Shabaab's still struggling. It's trying to, yes, look for other options.
Yeah. Now, you know, with this background, that Saturday morning, people out, families out, boom, there's this big attack. Let's look at the handling of it. Ben, there's a fantastic footage of you, a bomb going off behind you. A lot of people, a lot of Kenyans are asking big questions about the handling by the Kenyan authorities of that attack. From where I'm standing, it looked totally chaotic. There's conflicting numbers coming out. Did you get that sense?
Yes, I mean, I think it was very chaotic, and I think there have been conflicting numbers coming out, perhaps not surprisingly, and I'm not sure if we're ever really going to know what happened inside that mall to the full extent. I'm not sure we're even ever going to know exactly how many people were killed in there. But certainly there were pretty chaotic scenes on the Saturday, a lot of private security companies involved in rescuing people from the mall, a lot of security companies linked to embassies. Remember, this mall was where largely, not completely, but largely where the political and economic elite in Nairobi shopped. It's, you know, certainly middle-class Kenyans and some poorer Kenyans went there as well, but this was largely a place where expats and the political and economic elite shopped in Nairobi, a perfect place if you're Al-Shabaab or any grouping linked to Al-Qaeda to actually hit in Nairobi.
If you look at it, there had been various warnings about, something like this is imminent. I think the US issued a travel warning to its citizens on July 3rd saying, watch out. Did Kenyan intelligence and other intelligence agencies miss did they fail to see and prevent this thing? Could they have done more?
Clearly they did. I think one has to accept that these sorts of warnings are given all the time, and the difficulty, I think, for security agencies is which ones do you respond to most strongly. But Kenya is largely a free and open society. It's got porous borders with Somalia, pretty much a failed state, right on its doorstep, so it can't patrol its borders properly. But aside from that, security around shopping malls and within cities and free and open societies is a balance. Yeah. At the end of the day,
you can walk into any mall in South Africa without any fear of being frisked.
That's right. But I mean, if you were going to put security guards at the front entrances and frisk people going in, if you were going to put metal detectors as we had in South Africa in the 1980s, would that have stopped 10 to 15 people walking in there with AK-47s, lots of ammunition, and the willingness to die for their cause? Probably not.
But is that pragmatic look at the security and intelligence failures going to persist? I'm looking here at the newspaper from Kenya, the Sunday Nation, Andrew, and they're asking some very hard questions. Could the others who held hostages have also slipped away? Did the mastermind slip away an hour afterwards? Is the mood in Kenya turning in any way towards saying perhaps our leaders, our government let us down?
It's turning a little, I think. I mean, the country is certainly united in this sort of sense of anger and defiance and just confusion. Why would anyone do this to them? But I think that, yes, they are asking some very tough questions. There's a very vibrant, very aggressive media. There's still a lot of political ramifications from the last election, from Uhuru going to the International Criminal Court. There's also a disconnect, if you like, between this very sophisticated urban elite, political, they're tweeting everything every 5 seconds, and the reality on the ground, which is terribly poorly paid security guards standing there, normally unarmed. A lot of them acted very bravely, but there weren't enough there. Clearly, the police should have put, even if they didn't have a specific warning, and we still really don't know whether they did or what sort of the extent to which this was a real red alert. But even if they thought, you know, anyone who goes to Nairobi knows Westgate Mall is the obvious target.
Let me ask you, both of you, Andrew, you've lived in Nairobi, you live here now. Ben, you were there and you came back here. But South Africa featured quite prominently with Samantha Lithwaite identity here. Are we seen globally now? Is this conversation that we are a bit of a terror haven, that our passports and our identity documents are open to most people to forge and so forth?
Well, it's been an issue, you know, with the British visa regime with South Africa clearly for some time, and that's obviously part of it. And we've been hearing for years that there's been concern about Al-Shabaab and any other groups coming in here. It seems from officials I talked to that Home Affairs is cleaning up its act pretty impressively. But
is it? This was a new. Samantha Lithwaite had a new type of passport. This is the.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical. The South Africans have been saying for quite some time, well, you know, we've got one of the most sophisticated passports in the world, but presumably we're one of the few countries where people can come here, get handed legitimate South African passports from within inside Home Affairs, when they're not allowed to have them, when they're not supposed to have them. I think that's what sets us apart. And absolutely, I think we're being seen as a place that is relatively easy for terrorists to move in and out of. It's relatively easy for terrorists to move money in and out of. And clearly, it's pretty easy to get travel documents which allow them to travel pretty much anywhere in the world.
Not a good advertisement for South Africa, I have to say. But there were some amazing stories. Both of you filed amazing pieces about just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And
just before I left, I went down to the car park where the first people were finally being allowed back in to try and find their vehicles. And it might seem like a minor thing after the tragedy, but you know, the reality is a week on, people go back to find vehicles, and there was a couple there who'd come from the local radio station. Do you remember the woman who'd been killed on the roof? She was hosting this cookery program full of kids who were shot at point-blank range, and this couple had been there, and they'd spoken on Kenyan television with such passion and eloquence in the day or so after it, and we saw them a week on, and the look on their faces was, to me, the most sort of depressing and moving realization that you can come out of an event like that and you can speak with passion and determination, but a week on, you've still got to live with that. And they were broken, and it was heartbreaking to see them.
Ben said, you get the last word. Help me, how does Kenya move on from a tragedy as devastating as this one?
Really difficult to say at this stage. I mean, clearly there has to be a period of national mourning, national healing. I think that the government, it's incumbent on the government to be as honest as they can be about what they knew about this attack and what measures they're going to put in place to try and prevent this from happening again. But people in Nairobi are scared. People now realize how vulnerable they are. They realize that Al-Shabaab meant it when they said, we've been saying for the last couple of years, we're going to take the war in Somalia into the heart of Nairobi, and people are very scared that it's going to happen again. The government needs to reassure them that every security measure that they can take is going to be put in place.
Andrew Harding, Ben Saad, thanks so much for your time. After the break, our winner and loser of the week. Stay with us.
News that moves. ENCA.com.